Now it's great to have these set pieces on the table, these nice big builds such as the graveyard that I recently finished, and that of course formed the centrepiece for the very first test game of We Want the Gold, my fantasy skirmish game. So yeah, a nice big centrepiece, looks great on the table, and it works really well in terms of being able to move the figures around and everything else. But of course there is a downside to that, which is the storage and transport. Also, it is quite specific having a sort of centerpiece like that. It's not going to work for every type of game. So the other option when it comes to terrain is to make smaller pieces that we can place on the table, almost pieces of terrain that we can kind of scatter about. Is there a word for that, I wonder? Is there a phrase? Yes, today on Dragon's Teeth we're looking at building some scatter terrain. Hi, thanks for joining me today. So yes, the graveyard set piece worked very well for that first We Want the Gold game. Of course, I put a report up on the channel for that a week or so ago, and I'm delighted to say that everyone enjoyed it. So everyone has signed up for the second game, which we're going to apply some of the rule tweaks, some of the issues that came up in that first playtest. And of course, we're going to work a different table this time. We've done the graveyard, that shall be reappearing in the future, of course, but you know, let's try something different. In fact, because everyone from that first game is playing again and they've all decided to keep the same factions, then what we're going to do is continue the narrative. So now the game moves to another location, which is going to be a ruined temple supplied courtesy of Paul. He's got a very nice ruined temple model he's going to be bringing down. And I thought, where can this temple sit? What can it be in? Well, how about we put it in a marshy area? It's a desolate area, old haunted temple, maybe. I'm sure there's going to be something lurking in there. So let's put it in the middle of the marshes. This, of course, means that we need some marsh terrain. I still have a couple of my 12-inch tiles left over, if I can put them like that, my 12-inch boards. So I could make something up on those. I do have some other offcuts of MDF as well. I think most of them are about 2 foot long by maybe a foot. So I could potentially put those together and build an entire marsh. But as I said at the start, then we're back to this same issue again of where do I store the stuff? How do I transport it safely down the club? So instead I thought we'll go scatter. Also the thing is with scatter terrain, particularly something like Marsh, I mean it's universal. You can use that for everything from science fiction back to ancients, right? So that can be used in lots of games. Amongst the first uploads that I made to the channel back in the good old days was building some scatter terrain. At the time that was going to be for World War II 28mm. So I used carpet tiles to make bases for trees, for woods, and also to make some fields, that kind of thing. One other thing that I used then, and also in my 10mm gaming, you may remember, is CD bases. So when I thought about building up some marshy areas, I thought, well, let's try the CDs again. Okay, let's see how things went. Now, it just so happens that I found a box full of CDs in the shed. I had another bit of a clear out the other week. A whole box full of CDs, and these are all basically compilation CDs that I used to do for when I was driving to gigs and stuff like that. Now, slight rant about CDs here, because when these come out in the 80s, some of you may remember, we were sold on the fact that these were never going to scratch. They wouldn't be like your old vinyl records that are going to skip and all that kind of stuff. Well, some of these have been in that box for, I don't know, probably a good 15, 20 years. I got them out, I put them in my car, which is quite an old car, so it's still got a CD player. Every one of them skipped and jumped and got stuck. Bearing in mind, these were stored in sleeves in a box. And look, you can see there, just the amount of scratches on that. So there we go. So much for that promise. Anyway, I can't really complain. Every cloud has a silver lining, because I've got a ready-made supply here of bases for my marsh terrain. First job then is I'm going to start scoring these. Now, it doesn't really matter what side you use, I suppose. I'm going to use this side because this is a little rougher. I'm going to be putting my groundwork on here. This side obviously is very shiny, but even though this side is rougher, I'm still going to start scoring just so my groundwork will key in nice and strong. The next thing then is to put some water on these. So there's a few things I could go for. I could build up the groundwork and then put some resin in, but instead I'm going to use something that I have left over from an old project. You may remember a while back I made some rivers, mostly for my 10mm gaming, and I've got several offcuts of those. So that's what I'm going to use, and this is basically quite thick plastic sheet, and it's painted on one side. But as you can see, this is the side that's painted on. Even that is quite shiny, but when we turn that over we get a nice gloss finish to that. So I'm hoping basically I can stick this on, and that will give us a nice water effect without having to muck about with resin. Now, the other thing I'm aware of is having CDs, it does tend to give you a very regular shape. I don't really want everything to look the same, just a round bit here and some ground around the outside. So I'm going to try and create some different shapes with the water. Some might be larger, some smaller. I might even see if I can do something to put a couple of the CDs together, maybe almost like a modular fashion sort of thing. But before I do any of that, I'm going to start cutting out some of these shapes and sticking them onto the CDs. This also has the effects, of course, of covering up this hole in the middle, which won't really serve any sort of function otherwise, I suppose. And the good thing is I don't have to be too neat with any of this, because of course the groundwork is going to be covering over the edges, so I don't have to be particularly tidy. As long as it covers a certain area of the CD, then the job is done. I'm going to use PVA glue. I don't know how this is going to work. If this doesn't work so well, then I'll use the glue gun, or maybe even some super glue, but I think this should probably work okay. Just press that down. Make sure that's nice and flat. It does tend to curl up a bit at the edges. That was one thing I found when I was making the rivers with this. It does tend to curl at the edges, so that's something when I'm going to redo my rivers, I think, or I'm going to make some 28mm ones, I need to address that issue. But yeah, that's sticking down fine. So there we are. Let's just see. So we've got that nice shiny reflective surface there. So I'll get on and do the rest of these next. Next thing is to build up some groundwork around the water. Now, I'm not going to make this too high, just so long as we've got a bit of a height difference. That's the main thing. I also thought I could, you know, if I wanted to, put in some quite tall reeds, maybe a sort of stunted tree, that sort of stuff. But the other thing I've got to consider is transportation again. Obviously, anything higher than even a centimetre or so is potentially going to present problems. So I'm going to keep everything quite low. I'll do the ground, I'll put some scatter on, maybe some moss or lichen, that kind of stuff, and I think I'm going to leave it at that. Now, for my groundwork, I'm dipping back into my kids clay kit, 24 colours of air dry clay. I've barely scratched the surface of these. I've already been using these for quite a bit. They were pretty cheap, they're very easy to work with. So it's got a consistency of sort of plasticine or something. I'm just going to break some sections off and start placing that on the CDs. Here's our finished groundwork then. That's looking very lurid, isn't it? I suppose the downside of using the kid stuff is it does come in a lot of these very bright colours, but you know, that doesn't really matter. That's all going to be covered up. And of course, what I'm going to be covering it up with is my usual scatter. I've got a wide range of stuff here, from sort of leafy mulch, I think they were actual leaves or herbs in that one. I've got some small rocks, and I've also got a few larger rock pieces as well, so I'll add some of those in. Some sort of little bushes, that spongy type material, a whole range. And oh, this one as well I found, like a sort of lichen, I guess that is, so we'll add some of that into the mix as well. And having said that I wasn't going to have long tufts of grass, I immediately found in my in my stash a bag of grass. Things are looking up. This is probably from when I was doing 1/35th scale dioramas. Very good for simulating long grass in 1/35th scale, but if I trim this down a bit, this will make very nice reeds, hopefully in 28mm. So I'm going to be using just my usual PVA glue. Going to smother these and then get cracking on that. Oh, one other thing, that kid's clay comes in these little pots, so once I've used the clay, I've got an empty pot, everything gets recycled. So rather than go from the jar, I'm going to decant my scatter into these little pots just to make things a little bit easier. Right, so let's get the glue on first and then we'll start sticking stuff down. There we are, that's our scatter and our grass applied. So I'm going to let all these dry overnight, and then I'll just tomorrow go through and tidy a few bits up here and there. Grass needs a bit of a trim in places. The other thing is the edges. That's one thing with CDs, it's difficult to get scatter around the very edges. So what I'll do tomorrow is probably just paint those with a touch of green or brown acrylic paint. But overall, yeah, I'm happy with those. Again, these are Wargame scatter pieces, so it's getting that balance between something that looks good and something that is playable and transportable, of course, is the main thing as well. But yeah, these are going to do the job nicely. There we are then. That's 9 marshy areas. So a little bit of tidying up and finishing to do on those. Quick spray of varnish and they'll be ready. I might actually make some more because I've got a huge stack of CDs. It seems a shame to waste them. The only downside is, of course, you get that very regular shape. But I think if you start putting a few of these together, put some other bits and pieces on top, then, you know, that's not going to look too bad. The other thing I'm thinking as well is looking around at some other items I've got, is using the CDs to make some other bases. I've got a very nice altar that goes with some cultist figures, so maybe an altar piece. I may even put that on a CD and then build a bigger board that the CD can fit onto, and a bigger board will be like a big stone circle perhaps, with that altar piece in the middle. That would be a quite nice centerpiece for a game in the future. Anyway, that's it for today. Keep an eye out for that second We Want the Gold game. That will be coming up in a couple of weeks. Of course, I'll do a full report on that. You can see how the marshes look on the table, and you might even find out what is lurking in the depths of that ruined temple. As always, please do keep your comments, questions and suggestions coming in. Thanks to everyone who's left a message. Thanks to everyone who subscribed to the channel as well. It really does help out. And do let me know your approach to building scatter terrain. Do you prefer to build things yourself, or do you prefer to buy them? I have said before, particularly with things like the mausoleums for the graveyard, I was going to build those myself with some foam board. But to be honest, the 3D print ones were so cheap, like 8, 9, 10 quid. You know, it seemed much easier just to do that. It's a bit lazy, I know, but you know, time and money being what it is, it works out really pretty much the same price to buy a load of foam board and other bits and pieces as it does to buy a finished product. The nice thing with this Marsh build is I had the CD bases, I had all the scatter, the grass, everything else was here. So effectively I've not had to spend any money on that, which is welcome news to certain members of the Poynton household. Of course, what that does mean is I've got extra money to spend on figures, but we'll go into that another time. Okay, thanks again for watching. I'll see you soon.